I don't know when in the last few years I woke up to what the world was like, right, in terms of like how unbelievably white, right, our society is, right. Like I, just even recently, there was a photo on LinkedIn. The war had been declared with Russia.
Yeah.
And a think tank was put together, right? Like, how are we going to respond to this?
Yeah.
Now, I had a real moment of clarity because I realised that you've got one white man with a penis-shaped rockets aiming his penis-shaped rockets at another white man, right? And this think tank was put together, and luckily, I mean, you can't get away with this anymore, and it's fantastic. It was put on social media, and it was a room of 50 silver-haired white men, all in suits.
Yeah.
And I've been waking up to this recently as a young man, you know, thinking more about the world. And I come from professional sport, so I've been in cricket change rooms and I've experienced racism and I've experienced bullying, but I've also experienced the opposite. Like I've experienced brotherhood between nations, you know, like I've been in the change rooms where we've had Indians and Pakistanis and black guys, and there's no difference. I've had both. And certainly, you know, women as well. It's not racism, it's more like discrimination, I think is probably the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
You know, I read, I think I told you this, which is there are more men named Keith in the FTSE 500 than women.
That's a scary statistic.
It's funny, but it's not funny.
It's not funny.
It's funny, but it's like, you do this thing where you go like, and then we're, you know, you and I, we're sort of looking out at the world and trying to work it all out together while we're talking. And I'm like, I've been blessed enough to meet you, but also for you to go deeply with me about what you've experienced growing up. And I was born in the middle of the 80s. But you know, I come from a working class family, so I do know what it's like to be discriminated against. You know, I went to a rich school. Dad drove a Volvo. There was the boot didn't shut, and there was. I know what it feels like a little bit to be judged and discriminated, but not on the level that you know it. And you've told me stories, and we've had interviews about your upbringing in the 70s in Birmingham.
Yes.
You know, I can't even imagine. You know, I don't think we need to go too deeply into what that was like, unless you'd like to, but more like, how do you, like, firstly, even as someone who wants to become more aware, like, do you class, what would you even refer yourself, what do you refer to yourself as? Like, culturally, like, I could say I'm a white man, what do you say? Well, how do you refer to yourself?
God, yeah. I mean, it's funny that you.
And what am I allowed to say and what am I not? You know what I mean? Because I genuinely just think of you as like a brother, right?
Yeah.
But all this stuff around, like, what do you? Are you an Asian man? Are you? Like,
first of all, I'm a man.
Thank you.
For now, even beyond that, I'm just a human being.
Exactly. Yes.
For God's sake, I am a human being, and color doesn't come into it, but you're asked to complete forms, and they want to know your background, and I can understand why. So that then they can understand and analyze differences based on race and culture, and try and hopefully, that's the aim, I'm presuming they're going to do something about it if there are differences depending on backgrounds, such that they don't discriminate. But it is confusing, but I think you can see people think things have got better, and in some respects things have got better. But I tell you something else, Simon, that things are a lot more subtle. It's not like in the 70s. The big difference between the 70s, 80s and today is, whereas the 80s and the 70s, I could go down the street and be called a Paki or a Wog or all the other epithets that these smart young people used to think about and think of calling you. Now, they don't have to do that. They know that could cause trouble straight away. So they'll just do it in different, more subtle ways. Like, I was just reading in the papers in France, apparently, there's these beaches in the south of France. So they did this experiment. A couple went, and they were a black couple, and they wanted to hire the beach. You know, you could hire a deck chair. If they went in person, or they phoned up with foreign-sounding names, African-sounding names, the beach was busy. All apparently they were told that all the chairs had been sold, and then about 5 minutes later, either a white French couple came along, or they phoned up with typical French names, and miraculously there were chairs available. And this company was a big huge company in France looking after this side of the company of the beaches. So, you know, racism and discrimination is alive and well throughout Europe, Britain, but Europe, everywhere. So, but it's a lot more subtle. It's like, you know, I wanted to go to a club when I was growing up, and a lot of the nightclubs in Birmingham were racist. But it was very difficult to prove anything. It was just accepted fact. Don't try and get into a nightclub on Friday or Saturday. If you're a boy, if you're male and you are brown or black, you'd never get in. You wouldn't. There were certain nightclubs which are notorious for not letting you in.
I think the most interesting and shocking thing, I've got to know you over the last month or 2 months, and I think something that really disturbs me, right, and maybe like it really disturbs me actually, is there's a pattern emerging. So, like, you know, I'm in addiction, right, and I can trace the seeds of my addiction back and all this sort of stuff. But you're a man who grew up being bullied and racially discriminated against, right, and comes from a family that also did that, and there was it feels to me there was so much repression back then, because people would either just take it, right, like you've mentioned that there's that memory on the train where you're being racially abused and your dad and your family were just taking it, and you made a decision very internally that you weren't going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Which I think was really important, right? And I think it's really important that that's happened globally too, that they're not taking it anymore. But you've also gone ahead through your life, and at some point, from the outside looking in, and there could be other factors in there too, you've had 3 heart attacks. And you've had to really look at, you know, you've sorted yourself out health-wise, and now you're here to serve. Is there a part, I mean, I would be resentful, and you're not a particularly resentful person, and I would almost go, that caused that. And then I think to myself, how many consequences what are the unseen consequences of this? You know, mental health, suicide, health issues.
Of course.
Like, you know, a lot of young people would have grown up in really unsafe conditions, being completely abused.
Yeah. It does have an impact on you, and it has an impact on everybody who gets mistreated, Simon. It's just human nature. Whether it comes out in obvious ways, through hives or whatever, or other physical ailments, but it could be dormant in you, then it obviously stress. So it was diagnosed with me that stress caused my heart attacks. But stress from what? Yeah, stress from work, well, definitely my employer, and the way they treated people, for sure. But it was also, I would say, stress from dealing with day-to-day, whatever happens to you, trauma happens to you in life, as you would know, especially as from a young age, you carry it in some form or other.
Yeah.
It's how that comes out is the question, and inevitably it will come out. It's just how, and yeah, it did affect me, and how you deal with other people, and I don't think that's realised. It's only now the term mental health has come to the fore, and people start taking that seriously. But it does matter.
Well, it's really, you know, I think it's now becoming, I mean, there are some things that are more subtle, and then there are other things that people are becoming more aware that it's really important to treat people, well, some people are more aware that treating people kindly is an important thing, because, you know, I like you never know what someone's going through.
No.
I always think that's so important, isn't it? To remember that you never know what someone's going through.
Yeah.
In any situation. I used to think that I was working in sales.
Yeah.
I used to try and think to myself, like, I'm picking up the phone here, I used to, one of the reasons I've left sales is because it was like, you are ringing a lead. They are a prospect, they're a lead, and I'm ringing them up because I want to get something, and I'm manipulating the conversation to go down this route. They don't know when I'm calling them.
Yeah.
I've got no permission to call them at the same time. If they disagree with me, I'm trained to get around their objections rather than listen to them. And even in the training, it is to listen to them. It's a form of manipulation because I'm trained to listen to them. And it's like everything is dehumanized, and so I used to try and pick up the phone and go, oh my God, I'm picking up the phone, I'm ringing a mother or a father or a son, and then also I don't know what's happened in their morning. You know, I've been in hospitality, and the worst customers, we used to say the worst customers were in the need of the most sort of love, because we used to say you don't know what's happened to them. You know, when you get treated poorly in hospitality, you don't know what's happened to them. There is more of an awareness of this, I think, gradually, but it's still, you know, I've just come out of business corporate sales. Oh my God, it's bleak, but it's like, it's almost inhumane.
Yeah.
You know, it's inhumane. And this is like there's a humanity narrative here that's, you know,
you don't care, do you? Oh, in sales, they don't care really. It's insincere.
It's very insincere because it's disconnected from this. I think the whole thing gets healed, all of it gets healed with the acknowledgement and the understanding of one thing, and that is what you just started with. It was you're a human being. Yeah. Like we have this shared humanity. You know, there's no difference on that level.
No, there isn't. I mean, basically, everyone should be treated. I mean, it sounds obvious. You should be treated. You should treat somebody. I think it's quite clear that it's a well-known phrase. Treat people how you'd like to be treated yourself. And I still feel it's in this country, there's far too many people treat you, first of all, they look at you and they see your colour. Then they behave and they talk to you accordingly. And you have to prove them wrong because they have stereotypes about you. No matter where I go, it doesn't happen that often, but it still does. Even, I mean, people will know this. I mean, I know my friends, you know, neighbours, they've lived in a very, even in middle class suburbia, they can live in an area, and on the surface everyone's polite, but what it is, the neighbour hasn't talked to them ever, and then they find out from another person that in fact they don't want an Asian or a black neighbour next to them, so that's why they haven't talked to you in 10 or 11 years that you've been there. It's all very subtle.
Do you know, I had my first experience of this. It was I kind of had to go, okay, right, I'm a white man. We've had a good run. I had a job interview about a year and a half ago, and I smashed it. Smashed the job interview, definitely. And the guy who I came second, and I didn't get the job.
Okay.
And the guy rang me up and he said, Simon, you were the best in interview, but we have to go with a woman.
Oh.
We have to hire a woman because, you know, the team's male and they need to meet quotas. And it was a really interesting experience for me because I thought to myself, number one, I was like, I don't think I was particularly, I think I understood pretty quickly. I was like, okay, fair enough. Actually, you know, that team does need a woman, right? Then I was sitting there going, women and ethnic groups have been having this for years. I've played cricket. Do you know I've played cricket with so many South Africans?
Yeah.
Right? You want to talk about a racist country?
Yeah.
All right, I can just pretty much go ahead and say that right now, and I'll piss off some racist South African people I know. Because South Africa was so racist and there was no black people allowed to play sport, they then made the quota system, which means you have to pick three or four black people.
Yeah, that must have pissed them off.
Well, it's pissed some white people off because they basically, now the opportunity is going to the black guys. Yeah. And they're not as good at cricket. Yeah. The opportunity goes, which is exactly what it should be. It's a counter move. But then what happens is the white South Africans, they've got British passports to come and play here because of the quota system, and they blame the quota system. And it's been really interesting to watch that play out. And it's the same with feminism. It's like there's this suppression, and then there's a response. And the response can be a very angry response, because, you know, especially in the proper feminism's pretty angry response to being repressed. Yeah. And you could argue it's justified. It might go too far sometimes, but you go, of course, if you suppress any one thing, it'll have a counter argument. At the moment, I think I don't know, I kind of hope there's this, like, I hope the white man starts missing out on job interviews, and like job positions, because they have to start, we have to start looking at diversity properly, and we talk a lot about performance and things like that, and I think that diversity should be at the forefront of people's, the way we make up teams, the decisions we make.
You're absolutely right, Simon, but even we could talk about football, we could talk about kick it out, we could talk about the lack of black managers, we could talk about the lack of black and Asian non-white people in boardrooms, as you said. It still carries on, and there's, it's interesting that after the George Floyd back in March, whatever it was, 2020, all pronouncements by a lot of these massive companies, consultancies, PwC, Deloitte, just to name two, not saying those are the only two, but if you look at their proportion, and they were saying, I can remember reading about PwC, the head of PwC making these declarations that they're going to make things a lot better and fairer. Oh, so they've admitted it hasn't been fair, and now they're going to do something about it. But then if you look at statistics now, even 2 years later, you can clearly see that there's a difference in pay between white and non-white people, and that's fact. How many black and non-white partners are there? How many non-male partners are there? There's discrimination still there. My point is, it's all a load of lip service by a lot of organisations.
Do you think the trajectory is headed in the right direction? So if we fast forward 50 years, do you think we're on the right trajectory?
It's going far too slowly. Right, there's not enough at the moment, unless you. Has it been done with real meaning, or is it just lip service at the moment?
It strikes me that there's this massive thing, and then it gets swept back under the rug, and there's this huge thing, and then it gets swept back under the rug. It's not actually some tangible policy, the structural.
It's interesting.
Forward thinking. It's like there's a campaign, and then there's nothing, and then there's a campaign, and then there's nothing.
Yeah. So that kick it out campaign, for example, kick out racism. Yet you see it in the terraces. There's more racism than there's ever been.
But I think this is the problem with social justice, right? Like the problem. I'm really against social justice warriors. To make a fundamental change to society, there needs to be understanding of the mechanics and how it works. Like if you just get angry and expect the whole world to change, it doesn't work like that. And also, a lot of the people who are fighting against that, like I have if you can't make your bed in the morning, you shouldn't be fighting global issues. You know what I mean? Like most people, it starts at home with themselves. But I wonder whether this is it needs to be a deeper, more rational and more considered approach to what is actually the problem, because it also seems to be quite surfacey. Like if I sit here opposite you and I go like, whatever is happening externally in the biggest way, it starts as a seed, right?
Yeah, of course.
So what is it about human behaviour? When I look at you right now, right, what is going on in my mind that identifies you so differently, that means that I need to I'm trying to embody the mind of a racist, but it's like, what is it that makes me need to stand out and be better than you just because we're different?
You're taught it from a very, very early age. I can remember, even with my children's experience, it's so sad that even, my children, when they were 4 or 5, coming home and saying some boy or girl at school has made a comment about their skin colour, or call them all sorts of names, and where's that come from? Because that boy or girl who's made that comment, they've been taught at home. Their parents, through sheer ignorance.
Ignorance.
And that ignorance at home carries on, and we talked about values, and we talked about beliefs, and limiting mindsets and limiting beliefs. And where do those limiting beliefs come from? It comes from an early age, from your parents. And you've been taught that, and so it carries on and perpetuates. And then you have the education system. Again, we could talk a whole host of things about the empire and the belief system from the great British Empire. And, you know, that's a heavy subject, but the guy, I could talk to you about Satnam Sanghera, a very educated and well-meaning journalist who's written a book about it. And he got pummeled in social media. And I think he made a program and he made a documentary on Channel 4. He had to go off social media. He was getting so much abuse. People wouldn't accept, and he was trying to tackle this whole issue from an objective from a factual point of view. But he got pummeled.
Well, it's Independence Day today, Indian Independence Day today. It's 75 years, amazing, and that's. And then last week there was a Twitter thread about there was an American politician who was celebrating. I've got to get my facts so I'm not going to pretend to remember, but it was an American leader of an army that went into the Aztecs and victoriously liberated Mexico from the Aztec reign. Right. What that actually is that politician is celebrating an American general who went into Mexico and massacred millions of Aztecs. Millions. And you know, that is the story. Our culture, the white culture. You know, as a white man, I go, where's my heritage? Well, basically, it's across the globe. It doesn't matter whether, we were in Australia. Oh my God. What's happened to the Aboriginal people is awful. Do you know in Australia, I went to Australia and didn't know much about Australia. I was like, this country, literally, this country was founded in 1788 when... 1788, this country.
Laughable.
And then I sat there, and after about a couple of years, you start to realise that Australia is the oldest continent on the planet. And they came over, the convicts came over, and there were men and women who'd lived in Australia, the harshest place, in tribes for tens of thousands, and they massacred them. In America, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Lakota, they massacred them. In Mexico, the Aztecs, they massacred them.
And yet,
white people just arrive into tribal nations and massacre them, put a flag down and go, this was ours. And that's what they do. And then we sit here right now, and the tribal remnants exist, you know, as a white, the tribal remnants are there, and we just go, nope, didn't happen, nope, didn't happen.
Well, it is so many of those stories that, and because of the good nature, so we even Cook, who's celebrated in British history, and he made a note in his journal that when he first arrived on those shores, he was met by very friendly, welcoming hosts. And instead of reciprocating that, he made a note in his journal, oh, this is going to be easy, they're far too welcoming, and he made note of the naivety. And that's how it kicks off. And it hasn't stopped.
Well, I remember reading too in Australia that up until 1978, Aboriginal people were considered legally as flora and fauna. They were considered plants.
This is just
not even about vote.
What's happened to their children? And so many of them have been taken away. There's that whole saga of thousands of children being taken away from their parents.
The addiction and the issues of the Aboriginal culture. But there's the oldest culture on the world.
It's the way they've been treated. We talked about mental health. It does, when you get treated in a certain way for so many years, Simon, and we said, what happens to you? So I had my heart attacks, but you can imagine the mental health issues that affect certain races. Because if you go every day, I mean, listen, it's not talking, people can relate to people like Thierry Henry or the fastest man in the world, Usain Bolt. They write about it. Even to this day, they say quite openly, you know, Thierry Henry couldn't even get a cab in New York. He would just say, he would be there trying to get a cab in New York, and the taxi driver stopped, open the window, see he was black, and just drive off. Or Bolt was saying that he used to go around in shops, and then he would be tailed in these clothing shops or jewelry shops, he'd be tailed by 2 or 3 security men. I mean, it's just shocking. Michael Holding, the famous cricketer, asked if he can afford a watch when he wanted to buy a watch. Wow. I mean, of course it has a mental effect on you and how you deal with people on a day-to-day basis. You wouldn't be human if you didn't. Because we have feelings. Everyone has feelings.
So where does an individual get to the end of this little chat for now? And I want to keep talking about this, and I want to keep. I know that there's, it must be hard for you to approach it because there's so much more emotional charge around it. You've lived through it. But I really think it's important for us to keep talking about this. So, the reason I say this is because what do we do? What does like if someone's watching this right now, like somebody's watching this right now, what does someone who comes from a white culture that, I think about my culture, it's working class, but it's not middle class. I'm thinking like someone who's previously been a bit blind to these sorts of things. What do they do? What's the next steps on an individual level?
Well, the best thing you can do, and it doesn't happen nearly often enough, is to call it out when you see it. Do not become a passive observer. I think that's one of the worst things. Basically, you are just. It's like with the Holocaust. If you didn't do something about it, you are part of the problem.
Oof, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and there's too many times on the bus, all these abuse that people, these warriors recording it. What do they actually do about stopping it when they see racist behaviour? My children say to me once my girls were on a train, and this guy, so the whole train journey, my girl, and she was 15 or 16 at the time, this man started ranting and railing about her colour and her background. And the train was quite full, and not one person, and this happens over and over, and then she was crying and upset, and no one did anything. They just, what's even worse, they all got off, and he got off at the same stop in Amersham. And then you try and report it to the police, as I've done, and anyway, that's another story. But yeah, you got to call it out. Call it out.
So the apathy, apathy has to end, doesn't it? I'm a massive believer in that.
Yeah,
massively.
Even if it's at work, wherever you see it, call it out.
Yeah, great. I like that a lot. So, all right, let's just leave it at that. If everybody did that, there'd be quite a big shift quite quickly, I think.
Definitely a major step forward. Call it out as you see it.
Yeah.
You see it. If you see something, whether you go to see a sporting event, again, it still happens. They just ignore it. Don't ignore it. It's not acceptable. Call it out.
We're going to keep talking about this because I think this is a really important. There's a few really important conversations to have, and I think this is one of them. And I think that they're just even meeting you has given me the desire to unveil the truth a little bit more within myself. Culturally, I come from a family where there's men in my family, right, where they go, there's men in my family, and because it's cultural, I mean, we're talking about really kind men.
Yeah.
Right, really, there's not actually a racist bone in their body.
Yeah.
But they still say racist things, right? Now, they're not racist, right? How many people in this culture are not racist? They're not really, but they just say it because that's what was said. And I say things like, it's important for my generation to go, you can't say that. You can't say that anymore.
Simon, it's just ignorance, really. But there's ignorance from a Machiavellian and malevolent perspective, and there's just ignorance from
just a bit of education.
Yes,
just helps.
It just needs a bit of education. Yeah. But what I like, what I like about you, Simon, is that you are curious.
Yeah,
you are immensely curious. But I don't think there's enough people like you who are actually waking up to think, hang on a sec, what is going on?
Yeah, but I think also, Vipan, see, I don't believe that the answer is through huge. I think if it's got to the point where there's a huge angry reaction through a social justice movement, it's gone too far, and I don't actually think that's the answer, because I think what that does is it suppresses curiosity. These conversations are great, right? Because what they do is they foster curiosity, right? But I think that anything that's big and angry kind of suppresses it even more in some ways, because it doesn't give.
You're absolutely right.
It doesn't really raise awareness. It just sort of like burns bridges.
We talk about curiosity and having an open mind, Simon. And again, it goes back to your values and beliefs, but it's about being open to learn, rather than accept a belief. For example, we've read about it, and I remember being really frustrated about reading about it in history. For example, World War II is just seen as the great British fight back and the Churchillian fight back against the German and the Nazis.
Yeah.
But I didn't know anything about the impact of the Commonwealth, the Indian and all the other soldiers, African soldiers, who contributed with their lives in millions to the cause, not only in World War II, World War One.
Yeah.
I mean, and I bet you ask the average British person.
Yeah.
Did you know?
Well, I read a couple of very thought-provoking pieces early on in the Russia-Ukraine piece, and it's funny, I've not seen any of them since, but they basically were giving Putin's side of things. Doesn't want to join the UN, and I started to wake up to the massive amount of propaganda going on in everything, and it's like Putin, and actually I started to see the war as more like the whole thing is very unhealthy, but I started to watch this sort of like being told what I should believe about what's going on, and I realize the propaganda involved in everything.
Everything. You should question everything you read.
I'm getting a bit more wise to that.
Yeah, for
All
sure.
Right. Great
Nice
chat.
one.